Swoosh, and I'm going to talk about Inside Job again. This will be my third Inside Job video, and it's probably going to be my last one unless the show winds up getting renewed, which unfortunately isn't very likely. Inside Job is an adult animated comedy for a reason. I don't think anyone in this show is younger than 30. I'm not saying younger people can't watch the show and enjoy it. Of course they can, but you have to be of a certain age and or have certain life experiences to fully understand the subtext, unless someone explains things to you. I was always far more interested in the emotional abuse aspect of the story, so I'm going to be talking about some pretty heavy stuff. And some of what I have to say might not be pleasant to listen to. So there's your warning, don't watch this if you don't want to hear my brutally honest thoughts on narcissism. I'm really not going to pull any punches when I'm talking about it this time. If you're going to watch this, you probably need to have seen my other videos first, because this is kind of a supplemental video to get out my remaining thoughts on the show. This video also might not appeal to everyone, but I still felt like I needed to make it anyway. The subject matter the show is dealing with is very personal for me, and to be honest, reviewing the show kinda put me through the ringer emotionally. I'm okay now, but I was upset for a while. And I feel like I need to clarify some things for my own peace of mind. And maybe if someone watching has a narcissist for a parent, or maybe suspects that someone they're close to is a narcissist, perhaps listening to my experiences and or thoughts might help them in some way. To put it simply, I can see some of my parents in the characters of Rand and Tamiko. Reagan was close to her dad, and didn't have much of a relationship with her mom. With me, it was the other way around. I was close to my mother, and my relationship with my father was complicated, for a lot of reasons. But the biggest factor, by far, was my mother being manipulative, vindictive, and interfering with my relationship with him. As a child, I thought he was the bad guy and saw my mom as a complete victim, but when I got older, I realized that wasn't true. I did get pretty emotional when reviewing this show, but I don't know that I would have if Netflix had just aired season 1 as a whole. When I watched part 1 with no outside influence, I wasn't taking anything about it particularly seriously. Rand being such a bad father didn't really bother me because I knew he wasn't hurting Reagan intentionally. In fact, I thought it was funny. The Barrow stuff was hilarious to me. And I even found Tamiko amusing because her narcissism is so over the top and exaggerated, and no one ever calls her out on it. But yeah, when I watched the show alone, I never thought Rand didn't love Reagan. Even him acting like this didn't make me think he didn't love her. I wasn't sure why he wouldn't apologize, but I figured it was some sort of defense mechanism. And I immediately assumed that he took her job because he was hurt and angry that she told him to get lost. I never thought him taking her job was something he was planning to do the whole time. That never even occurred to me, at least when I watched the show with no outside influence. Basically, my thoughts after watching part 1 alone were, Tamiko acts like my mom, and Rand is kinda like my dad if he were a supervillain. That's a pretty weird coincidence. I wasn't entirely sure what direction they were gonna go in, but I was basically like, okay, well, as long as he loves her, I don't really care. Then I went on YouTube and saw what fans were saying. Rand's an even worse father than Rick. He was hurting Reagan on purpose. He was lying to her and using her the whole time to get back into cognito. He was deleting her memories constantly. He's a complete monster. Tamiko's the better parent, etc. I was pretty baffled by the way a lot of fans saw Rand and Tamiko, and I did try to ignore it. But it kind of started to get to me after a while, and I know that might seem silly to some people because it's just a show, but I can see some of my parents in both of these characters. And I didn't have a very good relationship with my father, mostly because of my mom. And he's not even alive anymore, so I started to get confused and upset. And there was even a brief period of time where I wasn't sure if Rand did love Reagan or not. The idea that he really didn't love her was honestly ruining my enjoyment of the show. And that was why I made that first video and took the emotional abuse aspect of the story far more seriously. I always saw all this stuff as symbolism and wasn't taking it literally. But in that first video, I did take everything literally when I was analyzing Rand, because I was trying to explain my perspective in a way that I thought fans would be more likely to be receptive to. If I had been wrong about Rand, I probably would have deleted that video and thought the show was complete trash. That's how important it was to me that the show not make it clear that Rand didn't love her. I mean, if you want to make a dad character a villain in your cartoon, then fine. But don't put even the smallest amount of my dad in there, and then be like, he doesn't love her and he never did. I would have been so offended. If there are fans that don't believe that Rand loves her even after watching part 2, I don't really care, to be honest. People can believe whatever they want. I'm sure there's some weirdo out there that thinks that pigs can fly. People believe all kinds of strange things. It's canon that Rand and Reagan love each other, and that was what was important to me. Tamiko is a narcissist. The show makes that very clear. She literally married herself. She's in love with her own reflection, just like Narcissus from Greek mythology. Gigi asks Tamiko if she considers herself to be a genius. Tamiko says, no, but actually yes. There's no evidence in the show that suggests that she's particularly intelligent, but she thinks she's a genius. So she clearly has a falsely inflated self-image, which is very typical for narcissists. She writes a book where Rand's the bad guy and he's the narcissist, and he's a terrible husband and an even worse father. And Tamiko is of course the heroine of the story. According to her, she did absolutely nothing wrong and she's perfect in every way. Never mind the fact that she ignored Reagan and neglected her to an absurd degree for her entire life. And she didn't even have a job during her entire marriage to Rand. So she contributed nothing and took all of Rand's money, and somehow she still sees herself as the blameless victim. Tisk tisk, Tamiko, stop acting like my mom. So from the get-go, Tamiko's narcissism is pretty obvious, at least to anyone who's familiar with how NPD actually works in the real world. Society in general doesn't understand narcissism very well. People are always throwing that word around without understanding what it means. Narcissism doesn't just mean a person is arrogant or kind of a jerk sometimes, or they don't like to be criticized. It's a very serious personality disorder that makes it impossible for them to have healthy, close relationships with other people. Everything narcissists do, they do for themselves. They're very selfish, and they're not capable of empathy, and they intentionally hurt the people closest to them for their own benefit. And they never sincerely apologize for the harm they cause to others. So that automatically means that Rand is the better parent, because at least he loves his daughter and wasn't hurting her intentionally. And he gets to the point where he accepts responsibility for his actions and tries to change. He's definitely a bad father, no one in their right mind would argue otherwise. But unlike Tamiko, he has redeeming qualities. You can read about narcissism or watch videos on it and get a pretty good understanding of how it works. But if you haven't been in a close relationship with a narcissist and been hurt by one, and experienced the insanity of trying to reason with a person like this, you probably aren't capable of understanding how cruel they are. And honestly, that's a good thing because it's not the sort of experience I would wish on others. My mother is a narcissist. She's not the same kind of narcissist as Tamiko, but Tamiko reminds me of my mother. In fact, she acts so much like my mother in part 2 that it was originally pretty disturbing to me. That was why I tried to convince myself that she's worse than my mother. I wasn't intentionally being dishonest. I think it was some kind of defense mechanism on my part. I had already gone through the grieving process of mourning the mother I'd never had years ago. So that was why analyzing Tamiko's behavior was originally so triggering for me, especially because there are so many fans who think she's the better parent. I also kind of forgot about how awful my mom is because I hardly interact with her anymore. But Tamiko sure did remind me of things that I tried to forget about. Society also has some kind of weird double standard when it comes to bad mothers. For some reason, there are always people who want to give a bad mother the benefit of the doubt, or make excuses for her, because all mothers apparently love their children, and even if a mom is a bad mother, there's a reason for it, and she's still somehow a victim. And everyone's supposed to love their mom no matter what. So there's a lot of weird guilt and self-blame tied into having an abusive mother. I'm not saying that never happens with dads, I'm sure it does. But it's really more of a mom thing. The reality, of course, is that a bad parent is a bad parent whether they're a man or a woman. Me trying to make excuses for my mother and trying desperately to understand her and have compassion for her, even though she had none for me, is what allowed her to hurt me as badly as she did in the first place. It's weird because on the surface, Tamiko doesn't appear to be much like my mother. If you met my mother, you'd never understand why Tamiko reminds me of her. Tamiko's narcissism is very exaggerated and grandiose. My mom is far more subtle, and she keeps her mask on most of the time, but reviewing the show kind of forced me to acknowledge that fundamentally Tamiko is the same as my mom, which makes me wonder if narcissists even have unique personalities. It's almost like the narcissism is their personality, and it dictates their behavior like a computer running a program. That's a rather disturbing thought, but I'm starting to think that it's true. There are people who have narcissistic tendencies that aren't actually narcissists, that could potentially change with self-reflection and effort. But I'm not talking about someone that's somewhere on the lower end of the spectrum. I'm talking about full-blown incurable NPD. I didn't quite connect the dots on this in my previous video, but Keanu being a vampire is symbolism for narcissism. Keanu appears to be a nice guy on the surface, but when you get close to him, you see that he's actually a monster. That's the way narcissism works. They'll be nice to strangers and acquaintances, but they'll hurt the people who are close to them, which is the opposite of how a normal person behaves. A normal person would be more likely to be kinder to the people that are close to them. They're both secretly vampires. Keanu is a vampire that sucks people's blood and literally kills them. And Tamiko is a vampire that kills people emotionally. This is the most accurate depiction of narcissism I've ever seen in a cartoon. I can't believe they went there. Is it a coincidence that Tamiko was dating this guy? Probably not. Narcissists have camouflage, and the persona they present to the world is very different than their true self. Oftentimes, a victim of narcissistic abuse will suffer in silence, and/or be very confused about what's happening to them. And even if they speak up, they won't be believed, and will even be shamed by people on the outside, because the narcissist is such a nice person to everyone else. That's part of what makes narcissists so dangerous and what makes them such terrible parents. Keanu says, "I guess I better start dressing my age." So it sounds like he's still going to give up immortality / quit being a vampire, even though Tamiko dumped him. Hilariously, despite being an actual monster, Keanu has some redeeming qualities and is willing to change. Tamiko has no redeeming qualities and will never change. To me, she's much more of a monster than he is.
This is your fault. Everything you touch comes unglued. Our marriage, our child.
She's a narcissist, so everything she touches would, quote, come unglued. But the thing is, she's so self-absorbed and so obsessed with admiring her own reflection that she really doesn't actively cause a whole lot of damage to others. There really just isn't anyone in the show willing to fawn over her the way that she wants them to, for her to even care enough to actively hurt them. Although, we do see that side of her in part 2, when both Reagan and Rand are desperate for her attention. I was originally confused about why Tamiko ignored Reagan and Rand. That's part of why I called her a parody of a bad mother in my previous video, because it's so obvious that she's a narcissist, and yet she ignores her own family. That's not typical for narcissists, as far as I know, but I did some research, and I understand why she did it now. From Psychology Today. In some situations, a narcissistic parent may choose to focus primarily on her or his self-absorbing interests, which to the narcissist are more exciting than child raising. The child is left either to the other parent or on his or her own. So that explains Tamiko's neglectful behavior. She was also clearly jealous that Rand and Reagan were close. It's actually very common for narcissist mothers to be jealous of their daughters, because they see their daughters as competition. I think Tamiko withheld affection to punish Reagan, because from Tamiko's self-absorbed viewpoint, Reagan was taking the spotlight away from her. That may have also been why she didn't protect her from Rand. This is literally Reagan's birthday party, and Rand set all this up, and he's trying to comfort Reagan. And he tries to include Tamiko. Right, honey? And Tamiko won't even look at him, and she angrily pops this balloon while she's reading this Better Husbands magazine. Her behavior is completely absurd. She's a grown woman, and she's acting like a child. She's jealous that Rand is paying attention to Reagan instead of her. If the mother is jealous of the relationship the daughter has with the father, which Tamiko clearly was, what can the daughter do? More complicating is the question of what the father can do. Often men in relationships with female narcissists choose to cater to the mother, so as to maintain the adult relationship. Rand clearly didn't do this, and neither did my dad. I don't think Rand even realized that Tamiko was jealous. In fact, it's pretty obvious that he didn't. Tamiko's over there seething with jealousy, and Rand's like, I feel confident about this marriage. He's not even being sarcastic, he really is confident because he doesn't understand what's going on. Now, Tamiko never loved Rand, but Rand does say, your mother and I had a life before you came along, and he's smiling when he says this like it's a pleasant memory, back when she used to be fun. So this suggests that their relationship was better before Reagan was born. There's no way that Tamiko was not jealous of Reagan, she definitely was. I experienced this with my mother as well, but in a different, arguably more messed up sort of way that involved her sabotaging me and trying to ruin my life. I didn't realize that's what she was doing at the time, but yeah. Tamiko is so utterly self-absorbed that she expressed her jealousy by ignoring her husband and daughter, and withholding affection and focusing all her energy on herself. I don't know about you, but I think a mother being jealous of her own child is incredibly pathetic and disgusting. I can see some of my father in the character of Rand, but he really only acts like my father in the sense that he's intelligent, but he has low emotional intelligence. He loves Reagan, but for the majority of their relationship, he has a hard time expressing that to her in a healthy way. He's bad at understanding his own feelings and expressing his feelings to others. But when he realizes that he was a bad father, he accepts it and tries to change. My dad was like that. A lot of Rand's behavior in part 2 reminds me of my dad when my parents were still married and he was more of a jerk, and our relationship was very unhealthy. It wasn't even really the way he talked to me as a kid that made me hate him. I mean, that definitely hurt my feelings. And I'm the middle child, so I did feel neglected by him to some degree. And I thought he loved my brothers more than me. But my mother manipulating me and taking advantage of my insecurities and causing a lot of triangulation in our family was the main reason I had such a poor relationship with my dad as a preteen and teenager. Reagan originally paid no attention to this book. In fact, she seems to think the book is pretty stupid. So Reagan doesn't really pick a side in part 1 when it comes to her parents. She acknowledges that they're both bad parents, although she is very obviously closer to her father, no doubt because he paid attention to her and her mom ignored her. However, in part 2, Reagan's opinion of her dad changes, and we do see an example of her experiencing triangulation when she's interacting with Tamiko. Reagan's in a very bad place emotionally at this point in the story. She thinks that she's been wrong about her father the whole time and that he never cared about her. So she's vulnerable and desperate for her mother's attention. The show even openly acknowledges this by having Reagan say that she has a coping mechanism right before she leaves to visit Tamiko. We've never seen Reagan interact with Tamiko like this before. Her dynamic with her mother in part 2 is very similar to how I was with my mom when I was younger and saw my dad as the bad guy. Reagan is gushing over Tamiko's latest boyfriend and serving the drinks, which is a bit weird because she's the guest. Keanu tries to do it, but Reagan takes the tray away and she's like, no, you just hug my mom. So she's obviously trying really hard to reassure her mother, cater to her, and make her mom happy. It's almost like Reagan's the mom in this scene, which is how I was with my mom when I was a kid. I was always concerned about her feelings and not my own. With Rand, it was the other way around. Reagan criticizes him, and he listens to her and changes his behavior and starts supporting her and tells her he's proud of her. But here it's backwards. Reagan doesn't criticize Tamiko at all, and Reagan is the one acting like the parent. She says, "I'm proud of you, Mom," and now that Reagan is behaving the way that Tamiko wants her to behave, Tamiko rewards her with affection. She's manipulating Reagan in this scene. Tamiko says, "I want you to come to my movie. Because you're supporting me, I want to support you." Which doesn't even make sense because I don't see how inviting Reagan to her movie, where she's absolving herself of all responsibility and blaming Rand for everything, is supporting Reagan. That's crazy. She's as crazy as my mom. And Reagan's falling for it just like I did when I was a kid. Tamiko's manipulation works because Reagan is afraid to criticize/be honest with her about Keanu because she knows her mom will reject her if she does that. Reagan knows Tamiko won't listen to her if she criticizes her in any way, so she tries to protect her mom in the only way she knows how, by being manipulative. Tamiko, who is a huge narcissist and only cares about herself, doesn't handle being judged well at all. Tamiko telling Reagan, "You're just like your father," and then blaming Rand and Reagan for her own unhappiness, is an example of triangulation. She's creating a false narrative by playing the victim and shifting the blame onto other people. My mom did this sort of thing to me too, anytime I disagreed with her about something when she was very clearly being unreasonable. She would compare me to my older brother, who I did not get along with for numerous reasons. She did that because she was trying to shame me into being compliant, and pit my brother and me against one another. Reagan obviously doesn't have a brother, so it's not exactly the same, but it's similar enough. Reagan has a very negative opinion of Rand at this point, so she doesn't want to be compared to him. It's probably making her feel guilty too. Am I a bad person like my dad is? Is it my fault that my mom's unhappy? That's pure nonsense, and it's obviously confusing Reagan a lot. This is abuse. Tamiko is abusing Reagan here. Tamiko's manipulation works because Reagan accepts all the blame and makes sure that Tamiko knows that it's not that Reagan doesn't want her mom to be happy, it's just that her mom has bad taste in men. So nothing is Tamiko's fault, and she apparently has no agency whatsoever. It's Rand's fault, it's Reagan's fault, it's the fault of every man Tamiko's ever dated. Reagan's relationship with her mother, if that's even what you want to call it, is insanely toxic and unhealthy. I don't really know how to explain it better than that. Narcissists in real life don't really act like Rand, they act more like Tamiko. Anyone that's dead set on believing that Rand is a narcissist and Tamiko isn't does not understand how narcissism works in the real world. Narcissistic abuse isn't always obvious, and if you haven't experienced it yourself, you might not be able to recognize the signs or fully understand how damaging it can be. Narcissists can alternate between being affectionate and using a lot of guilt and shame tactics that leave the victim feeling confused and drained. It's almost like death by 1,000 cuts. Notice that even when Tamiko is being affectionate with Reagan here, she's still refusing to accept any responsibility for being a terrible mother, and she shifts the blame onto her own daughter. And it works because Reagan starts blaming herself for her own abuse. Mom ignored me because I didn't support her. That's what Reagan thinks. The symbolism they use with Keanu being a vampire is very accurate. This is what I saw when Reagan was attempting to bond with her mom, because I understand what Tamiko was doing to her. My mom was a terrible mother, arguably worse than Tamiko, at least in some ways. She was very manipulative and intentionally caused a lot of chaos in our family. But as a child, I didn't understand what she was doing, and she was very good at playing the victim. So I felt sorry for her and saw my dad as the bad guy for a long time. I did believe what was written in this book, or I went to see her stupid movie and gave it 5 stars, however you want to word it. There was a lot of tension in my family back then, and my dad was stressed out and angry, probably because he was doing his job as the provider, and my mom was contributing nothing and blaming him for everything. So sometimes he would lash out. Even Rand calling her Jelly Bean reminds me of my dad. When I was a kid, my dad and I were having an argument, and he said something really mean to me. As mean as what Ren says to her. And my older brother heard him say it, and he got mad, and he was like, "Don't talk to her like that, that's the kind of stuff that echoes in your head at night." And the hilarious thing is that I genuinely did not care, because at the time my relationship with my dad was terrible. So I always had my defenses up. It was this weird combination of me already thinking he didn't love me, and what he said was so mean that I didn't even believe that he meant it. So I just went in my room and was like, "Stupid dad, being stupid like he always is." And I couldn't have cared less. Then years later, when I was an adult and I realized that my mom had been abusing me and lying to me the whole time, and I had that falling out with her, and my dad had apologized for being a bad dad and all that, and my relationship with him was better, for some reason he brought it up. And he said, "I should have never said that to you, I'll regret till the day I die I said that horrible thing to you." And he was very upset and felt guilty about it. And I was surprised and I said, "It's okay, don't worry about it." But in my head I was thinking, wow, he really thought that hurt my feelings. I did not laugh at him, obviously, because that probably would have hurt his feelings, but I kind of felt it was hard for me not to laugh. But yeah, he felt really bad about it. My dad could be really cute sometimes. He was actually really sweet when he got older. So to me this is funny because I know why he's doing it. He's just being a jerk or a man-child or however you want to word it, because he's mad and hurt that she told him to get lost. It's really no more complicated than that. I laughed so hard when I watched this the first time you don't even know. Ren trying so hard to be the bad guy was hilarious to me. It didn't even last very long, he only acts like this for one episode. I actually don't know if Ren is crazy canonically. To me he is, because that's the only way his behavior makes sense to me. Because I believe that he loves Reagan. To me that's very obvious. And I also take the emotional abuse in the story pretty seriously. But I guess he could just have such low emotional intelligence that he just really struggles to see things from other people's perspectives. He genuinely did not believe that she needs friends. He eventually realized that he was wrong about that, but that was what he originally believed. And I also don't think it was necessarily that he didn't want her to have any friends. He just didn't understand that friendship was necessary for her. He saw Oren as a nobody that was going to distract her and keep her from skipping grades and reaching her full potential. It's like an insanely exaggerated example of a parent being like, "No, you can't be friends with that kid, he's a bad influence on you, you need to focus on school." From his incredibly warped perspective, he thought deleting Oren was helping her because she won't miss a kid that she can't even remember. We do find out in part 2 why Ren would not give a proper apology here. I still think a lot of my previous analysis about him in this scene was correct. At this point, he understands that deleting Oren hurt her, and he regretted doing it. But I still don't think he fully understands why it was so wrong. I mean, if he were even capable of fully understanding why that was such an awful thing to do to her, he wouldn't have done it in the first place. Reagan says, "I know it's scary to give up control." So part of why he wouldn't apologize was because he was afraid to give up control of the situation and show vulnerability to her in this moment. He almost lost her when they were on the moon, and he just accepted the fact that he was a bad father, and now he's having this Oren thing, which is the worst thing he ever did to her, thrown in his face. She's also surrounded by friends, which is even more proof that Oren was important to her. And it's also probably making him feel very insecure. And when he apologized to her when they were on the moon, they were alone. Even my dad apologized to me for being a bad father in private. There wasn't a crowd of people watching us. And I'm glad that there wasn't, because him apologizing to me made me very emotional. And I honestly don't know how I would have reacted if other people had been listening and observing us. Knowing that my dad loved me, and that he always had, broke through that wall I had around my heart. And it scared me because it made me feel incredibly vulnerable. Now that I knew that he loved me, he could have hurt me so easily, and that was terrifying to me at the time. This really should have been a private moment. It was no one else's business. And it's possible that Ren would have eventually apologized if they had been alone. So honestly, this whole situation was kind of a shit show. He obviously handled things very poorly, but I kind of understand why he reacted the way that he did. All of this was a defense mechanism because he didn't know how to handle the situation. I don't know if she believed with absolute certainty that he never loved her in this moment, but she's probably questioning that at this point because of how insensitive he's being. And she doesn't want to be around him because he won't give her any space. Him taking her job is what really drove her over the edge. She sounds like she's about to cry when she says, "How could you do this to me?" This is the moment where she truly feels betrayed. He reinserted himself back into her life so she can't ignore him. Rand, this is not the way to handle this. But at the same time, it's like he's retired. Reagan gave him like 24 hours to get out of her apartment. His wife took his house. Does he even have anywhere else to go? Does he have any money? What was he supposed to do? Die under a bridge? Part of me understands why he took her job. I don't know what to tell you. This is an adult animated comedy, and I can see things from both of their perspectives. That's part of what makes it so funny to me. The way Rand hurts Reagan is similar to how a narcissist parent who's very involved in their kid's life hurts their child. Interfering with her relationships with others, being manipulative/controlling, thinking she's like him, etc. That's why so many fans originally assumed Rand was a narcissist based on what they saw in part 1. Because in a way he does kind of act like one. Not so much in regard to his personality, but more in the way his parenting affects Reagan's development. Rand was written that way intentionally. Even the whole him betraying her thing is really only something a person with a narcissist for a parent experiences, as far as I know. Assuming, of course, you were close to them as a child and you believe that they loved you, and you eventually confront them over them abusing you, like I did with my mom. And then you're like, what? You were actually a monster the whole time? So it's kinda like Rand hurts Reagan how my mother hurt me. But the twist is that he wasn't hurting Reagan intentionally. And he loves her, and he apologizes. It's weird and very subversive. That's what I meant in my previous video when I said Rand is like both of my parents mixed together. He's a pretty fascinating character, honestly. I just really don't feel like Rand gets the credit for being fascinating that he deserves. I like Rand a lot. I think he might be my favorite character. My favorite character used to be Brett, and then it changed to Rand. I don't usually change who my favorite character is, that's pretty weird. It's obviously because Rand reminds me of my dad. I mean, who am I kidding? Reagan feels betrayed by Rand and doesn't believe Rand loves her throughout almost the entirety of part 2. She's a drunken wreck when we see her at the beginning, and she calls Rand an amoral sociopath. I'll take Rand down, and when everyone sees how pathetic he is, I mean the world, will be better for it. So she's trying to convince herself that she wants to stop him for the good of the world. But the truth is that this is super personal for her, and she's hurt and pissed off because she doesn't think he loves her. Her emotions are really tied up into all of this, as are Rand's, which is why a lot of their behavior in part 2 is so out of character. At this point, she does believe that Rand was hurting her intentionally, and that he was using her the whole time. Which is what a lot of fans originally thought. Which is why he was so hated and seen as a monster by the majority of the fanbase. Interestingly, this is the same way I felt about my mother when I hated her. I want to talk about this scene again because I didn't really explain how I was able to stop hating my mother before, and I don't want people to think I still hate my mom because I genuinely don't. My mother intentionally interfered with my relationship with my dad in a number of ways. And the consequences of her manipulation and abuse didn't really hit me until my father was gone. I did love him, and I still do, and he loved me, but I didn't get to resolve my feelings for him. If we'd had more time, I'm sure I would have, but he died before I could do that. And at the time, I had a lot of confusing feelings that I couldn't really process and was in a lot of pain. I was so angry at my mother, and I eventually confronted her again. And I kind of went back and forth with her the way that Reagan does with Rand. You fucked with my head? I'll kill you myself, she says, and then she's like, how could you do this to me? She also goes back and forth between calling him Rand and Dad throughout part 2. She does this because she still loves him on some level, and she's confused about how she feels. My mother responded the same way she did before, only this time it was even worse. All she did was gaslight me, mock me, and play the victim. She blamed everyone under the sun aside from herself. She blamed my dad, she blamed me, she even blamed her own mother. It was infuriating. I felt like I was losing my mind trying to get some kind of honest communication out of that horrible woman. I hated her. And it wasn't like the anger I felt towards my father as a child, when I saw him as the bad guy. This was far more intense. As a child, I hated my father because I didn't understand the situation. I saw my mother as a victim, and I thought he was mistreating her. It was almost like I hated him for her. But when I hated my mother, it was because of what she did to me. I thought she loved me, and when I realized she didn't, I felt deeply betrayed and used. Feeling anger or even hatred towards someone who has abused you is normal in my opinion. I am in no way trying to shame anyone who has felt that way, or who still feels that way about someone who has hurt them. I've been there and I know how it feels. But in order to heal or move on, you do want to eventually get to the point where you release at least a majority of that anger. Especially if you hate that person with the fire of 1,000 suns like I hated my mother, because that's obviously unhealthy and self-destructive. Narcissists are emotional vampires, and feeling anything for a narcissist that you once trusted, even anger or hatred, continues to give them power over you. That's why one of the first steps towards recovering from narcissistic abuse should be reaching a state of apathy. When you truly understand how narcissism works, you'll realize how fragile these people really are. Narcissists crave attention, they feed off of it, and they can't stand to be ignored. When you finally accept them for what they are, and minimize their importance in your life, or cut them out completely if that's possible, and you eventually stop caring about what they think, they can no longer control you. There are people that interpret that as forgiveness. Forgiveness means different things to different people. When people say that forgiveness is for yourself, not for the other person, they're talking about this fourth definition, to cease to feel resentment against. Notice that it says to forgive one's enemies. So that sounds more like something you'd do with someone you weren't particularly close to. Betrayal comes from someone you loved and trusted. So I feel like that's a different thing. It makes no sense to me that someone would forgive a person that they loved and trusted and then want nothing to do with them. I don't understand that. To me, forgiveness means that you don't forget about what that person did to you, but you still love them enough to try to repair the damaged relationship. I forgave my dad a long time ago. It's myself that I can't forgive. For letting my mother come between us, and for not trying harder to fix things with him when he was still here. Guilt is something I still struggle with, and I don't know if I'll ever get over it, to be honest, but that's a separate issue. And those feelings are for my dad, not my mom. My mother refused to apologize, and gave me nothing to work with, and kept hurting me over and over. So forgiving her was not an option, and it still isn't. I did need to let go of my hatred though, and I did that by going no contact for several years. I never would have been able to stop hating her if I hadn't done that. It was absolutely mandatory for me to get away from her. And then slowly over time, I was able to accept the fact that she is a bad person, and then I mourned the loss of the mother I'd never had. I don't see it as forgiveness. I see it more as me ripping her claws out of me and kicking her away, so I could climb out of the pit of despair and misery she forced me to grow up in. I know that's quite the visual, but if you don't know what it's like to be raised by a person like this, then you might not be able to understand. A lot of people raised by narcissists have to do this, so they can break free from the narcissist's control. They call it mourning the fantasy parent. Basically, the woman I thought loved me never existed, and I had to accept that, and mourn the idea of her. It was a terrible experience. It's the worst pain I've ever felt in my life, but I got through it. I did eventually start talking to her again for my own reasons, but I am very low contact. I hardly speak to her at all, and when I do talk to her, which is very rare, I just feel like I'm talking to a stranger. Technically, she is my mother, but I don't see her that way anymore. To me, she's just some lady. The difference here is that Ren wasn't hurting Reagan intentionally, and he loves her, and he sincerely apologizes, just like my dad did. So it's easier for Reagan to resolve things with her dad than it was for me to resolve things with my mother. Whether she forgives him or not is her decision, but there's a big difference between a parent with good intentions, hurting their kid on accident, and a parent having bad intentions and hurting their kid on purpose. It's not even remotely the same thing. Rand is not a narcissist, but he does arguably have some narcissistic tendencies. He's manipulative, but his intention is never to hurt Reagan when he does this. I don't know if him trying to split Brett and Reagan up here counts as manipulation, because he's being honest. What he's saying is true. He may also not want Brett to come in there with them because Brett backing her up would make it harder for him to keep her from finding out about Oren. I don't know if he's thinking about that at this point, but he might be. Even if he is being manipulative here to some degree, his intention is still clearly to protect her. His body language seems very protective to me, and he's looking at Brett so suspiciously. I honestly thought it was kind of weird that Brett turned on them so quickly, especially because he was following Rand around like a puppy when they were on the moon, and he literally wanted Rand to adopt him. And then all of a sudden in the next episode he's calling Rand a psychopath. Why did he want Rand to adopt him if he thinks Rand's a psychopath? Because of his daddy issues, I guess. Reagan says, I know him, he's an asshole, but he has a good heart. What she means is, he wouldn't hurt me on purpose. He wouldn't betray me like this. He loves me. That's what she means. Then Brett's like, it's him or me. I like Brett, but I'm not gonna lie, he made me mad in this scene, so I don't blame Rand for not trusting him. Brett does apologize, and he makes a pretty big effort to make it up to Reagan later, but he never apologized to Rand, which bothered me. Then again, I don't think Rand cared. In fact, I'm quite certain that he didn't. They were all kind of being jackasses, because even Reagan turned on Brett temporarily until he played his audio journal, and Gigi and Mike were smacking him around. That made me mad too. I don't think Rand gets enough credit for being the only character that wasn't flipping out and accusing someone else of being the mole. He even says he got bored listening to them Agatha Christie each other, and that's why he ate the cupcakes. I totally fucking believe it, that is why he ate them. He didn't even think the drama was entertaining, he thought it was stupid. He's right, it was stupid. I don't care what anyone says, I like Rand. I love you, Rand. Reagan is also manipulative, which is no doubt something that she picked up from her dad. Reagan manipulates Rand in this episode. She lies to him and makes a fake storm outside her apartment to get him to stay inside, because she doesn't want him to know about Tamiko getting married to herself. She knows it'll upset him if he finds out, and she also no doubt doesn't want to deal with him flipping out and ruining the wedding and stressing her out. So she's manipulating him for herself and for him. And she does the same thing to Tamiko in part 2. Rand and Reagan don't always do things for only one reason, and frankly, neither do most people in real life. A lot of people associate manipulation with narcissism, and narcissists are manipulative. But they don't ever have good intentions when they're manipulating people. They do it for purely selfish reasons. You're just like your father. This is a very loaded statement, and just like everything in this scene, there are layers to it. First of all, Reagan is not just like Rand. She's not an extension of her father or her mother. She is her own person. However, she was very obviously influenced by Rand, for better or worse. The show isn't even remotely subtle about this. There's tons of evidence everywhere that shows us that she is like Rand in some ways. It's worth noting that Reagan doesn't seem to find the idea of being similar to Rand offensive until she stops believing that he loves her. Personally, I don't think her being like Rand is that big of a deal, but I look at it like she's far better off being more like her dad than her mom. Now, I want to talk about the ending of part 2 in a bit more detail. A lot of fans say that Reagan erases Ron's memories here, which I don't agree with. Ron has the gun in his own hand, puts it to his head, and pulls the trigger himself. How anyone interprets that as Reagan erasing Ron's memories is beyond me. I mean, are we even watching the same show? He erased his own memories. I will say that Reagan is clearly being manipulative here, because she's pretending like she's gonna erase her memories too. But I don't see how that translates to her erasing Ron's memories. The reason Ron was even in that meeting was because he was caught trying to drink an entire vat of mind-erasing fluid. So it's established from the beginning that Ron wants to forget. He also deleted his own memories in that reality where he and Reagan both worked at Cognito. Ron was haunted by the things he'd done, and he was always going to erase his own memories with or without Reagan. The show makes that very clear. Personally, I don't see how her relationship with Ron ever would have worked because she was in such a bad place emotionally throughout almost the entirety of their relationship. And when she finally realizes that Rand does love her, she has almost no time to recover and is immediately forced to choose to either run away with Ron and delete her memories and leave Brett and Rand and her whole life behind, or let Ron go. The way that I see it is that Ron's life experiences or trauma have broken him, or they would have eventually. I don't mean to be morbid about it, but it almost seems to be symbolism for him being suicidal, honestly. Or at least giving up on life. I mean, he is putting a gun to his head. Mind-erasing guns don't exist in real life, but real guns do. You're the only thing that matters to me. Reagan does love Ron, but he is not the only thing that matters to her. And I'm not just talking about her job. I can't wait to finally sleep at night. He can't even sleep without forgetting everything. I never interpreted this scene as Reagan making some sort of selfless sacrifice and giving up her happiness for the sake of the world. Even if that's what she says out loud, there's more going on here than just that. It's not that I don't like Ron, he's a nice guy, and I understand why Reagan loves him. And I also understand to some degree why he wants to forget everything. He's been through a lot, and I do have sympathy for him. But I hate the idea of Reagan deleting her memories. That's my main issue with her running away with Ron, that she would have had to forget everything to make that relationship work. People's life experiences are part of what make them who they are. So deleting her memories would basically make her a different person. Now, if I could just forget about my mother, I probably would, to be honest, because there's no silver lining with her. All that woman ever did was hurt me. But the thing is, I can't forget about her without also forgetting about my dad and my little brother, because those memories are intertwined. And of course, I would be deleting every life experience I've ever had. So I'd be the same age, but I would have learned nothing. So even if I did have the option to forget everything, I still wouldn't do it. People in real life who suffer and go through trauma can't just erase their memories and go to another reality. They don't even have the option to forget. But even though this is an option for Reagan, she still clearly doesn't want to do it. So she seems to view this solution the same way that I do. To me, this would have been the worst ending ever because it's so unrealistic. I would even go so far as to say that it's childish. This is straight up Rick and Morty stuff to me. And that was how I saw Rand handing her this gun, too. This reality's fucked, there's no fixing anything, let's go somewhere else. Is it a coincidence that Rand eventually winds up actually trying to go to another reality like Rick does, and he fails to find a reality where things are back to how he wanted them to be? Probably not. He's not overpowered like Rick is, and he's a much better written character that acts more like a real person. So this didn't work for him. If Rand wants to fix his relationship with Reagan, he has to make the effort to do that, like a person in real life who actually loves his child would have to do, which he does later. Inside Job handles the idea of just pressing a button and starting over with far more seriousness and maturity. I'm not trying to hate on Rick and Morty, it's funny, but to me that's just a silly, goofy show. Most fans seem to agree that this was not an acceptable solution, so I don't understand why this is. To me, it's the same thing. They're both giving her a choice, and she refuses both times. To me, this would have been like her giving up and admitting that she's broken. She clearly doesn't feel that way. I mean, she never found a single reality where they were happy together. So that means she never found any realities where she was willing to erase her memories, aka her pressing a button that magically fixes all her problems, and they escape into Fantasyland. They do love each other, but their relationship was never going to work. Maybe in another life they could have been happy together, but not in this one. Anyway, that's just the way that I see it. Whether Rand is a bad person or not depends on how you choose to look at things. I actually regret ever saying he was a bad person. I don't even know why I said that because I didn't believe it when I said it. And I don't think he is a bad person. Hopefully my overall perspective on Rand came through in my previous videos, but I was clearly having a really hard time articulating my thoughts on him. Even if he became corrupt because of his involvement with Cognito, he got to the point where he wasn't like that anymore. My perspective is also different than a lot of fans because I care more about the relationships between the characters and their intentions and their willingness to change. I mean, to me, Tamiko is a lot worse than Keanu is. It's also pretty hypocritical to be so hard on Rand and let everyone else off the hook. I was always aware on some level that everyone working at Cognito Inc. is arguably a villain, but I think Netflix cutting season 1 in half on such a huge cliffhanger, and the hatred many fans had for Rand, and me getting emotional about it, kind of distorted my viewpoint. In fact, it distorted my viewpoint a lot. Everyone working at Cognito is well into their adulthood, and they should all be aware of how evil the organization is, and that includes Reagan and Brett. I do like Brett, I like him a lot, but I have to admit I do sometimes get a bit annoyed when some fans act like he has no agency because he's a dumb himbo or whatever. Brett even openly acknowledges that Cognito is evil and he just keeps working there anyway. I don't know if he still has that microchip in him or not, but even if he does, if he really wanted to leave, I'm sure he could just have Reagan remove it. He stays because he doesn't want to leave his friends. He had a very traumatic childhood, and this is supposedly the first time he's had any real friends. That's why he stays. But I don't know, Reagan and Brett are really the only ones that seem like they're particularly close to me. I really don't care for most of the side characters in this show, to be honest. Reagan is a bit odd because she doesn't seem to understand how evil Cognito Inc. is for a long time. I assume that's probably because of her being so poorly socialized and growing up in a bubble. She never even had a friend before she met Brett. It doesn't excuse her working there, but I think that's why she doesn't get it, so to speak. However, she does eventually get to the point where she understands that Cognito is evil, and seems to think that she can change things from the inside. I understand why she wants to do that. She's been working towards getting that promotion for nearly her entire life. And if no one ever tries to improve things, then obviously nothing's ever going to change. But objectively speaking, technically anyone who works there, at the very least has questionable morals or is a villain or however you want to word it. And even though Reagan gets to the point where she has good intentions and wants to help people, clearly no one has the right to rule the entire world. She definitely got really carried away at the end with that algorithm stuff, and to be honest, it did kind of weird me out. And so did all that crazy stuff the robes were saying. The robes always weirded me out, and I never trusted them, and neither did Rand or Ron. Reagan was definitely very naive to trust them, and then they wind up being the bad guys at the end. I never thought that Reagan could fix the world, or that she even had the right to decide what's best for everyone. I mean, she did create an algorithm that's supposedly unbiased, but I don't know, that seems a bit far-fetched. There's no way to create an algorithm that can decide what's best for every living creature on Earth. The very idea of that is ridiculous. And you're also taking away other people's free will by deciding what's best for them. So yeah, even though her intentions are good, she's still clearly in the wrong. No one can fix all the problems in the world, and I don't think that was the point the show was trying to make. The whole ruling the world aspect of the story is obviously not relatable. It's more some of her issues and her feelings and her personality traits and her character growth that's relatable to certain fans. I saw all of this as her refusing to let her trauma and the cruelty of the world break her. I wanted her to keep fighting rather than forget everything and run away. All of that is just tied into her working for this incredibly evil company. Reagan concludes that Rand is just her dad in the end. The only reason she ever even hated him was because she didn't think he cared. She says evil boss and dad in jail in this scene. So she sees JR as evil, but she doesn't see Rand that way anymore. That's literally the reason I never liked JR to begin with, because I knew he didn't give a damn about anyone but himself. In the end, Reagan feels the same way about her dad that I felt about mine. She obviously doesn't hate him, she loves him. Reagan, Rand, and even Brett all have issues with wanting to be in control. They want to be in control of their own lives, and to some degree other people. But part of becoming an emotionally mature, well-balanced adult is accepting that you can't always be in control. You can't control whether other people like you. You can't control what other people say or do if you don't agree with them. You can't control the circumstances of your birth or what country you were born in. You can't control whether you come from a loving, supporting family or not. There are always going to be things that are beyond your control. Everyone is affected by their upbringing and environment to some degree, some far more than others, especially if you had a very traumatic childhood. And I have a lot of empathy for people that have experienced that sort of thing because I know what it's like. But again, part of growing up is accepting responsibility for your own actions and behavior. Reagan's a grown woman, she's 30 years old, and whatever influence Rand had on her is a part of her now, just as my mother's influence is still on some level a part of me, as is my dad's influence. Self-awareness is an important trait to have. I have plenty of my own flaws and I am very aware of that. However, Rand is, in my opinion, fundamentally a good person, just like my dad was. Discussing the emotional abuse in this story is kind of a weird balancing act for me, because I don't want to downplay Reagan's abuse, but at the same time it's really obvious to me that Rand really isn't that bad of a parent. Anyone that's dead set on believing that Rand is the worst parent ever doesn't have any real concept of true cruelty. There are way worse parents than Rand in this world, trust me. Reagan was never depicted as some overpowered girl boss character that was always right about everything. She's been wrong about a lot of things. She has a lot of flaws. I never thought she didn't. That's part of what I like about her. Characters that don't have flaws and don't learn and grow over the course of the story are boring. This is an adult animated comedy for a reason, and there are a lot of layers to this show. Reagan is dealing with trauma and was in the middle of her character arc. Rand and Brett were in the middle of their arcs as well. I'm sure all of this would have been addressed in later seasons, and Reagan would have realized and accepted that she can't fix the world, and that she can only control what goes on in her own life. And maybe gradually over time she could have become less of a workaholic, who knows? There's no telling what direction they were going to go in. Netflix canceled the show before any of that could be explored properly. I mean, they only got to make one season. I did enjoy Inside Job. It's very impressive, at least in regard to how they handled the subject of emotional abuse. I was especially impressed by how accurately they depicted narcissism. It was so accurate that it disturbed me. But Netflix really should have just aired season 1 together like they were supposed to. There was never supposed to be a part 1 and a part 2. Part 1 and part 2 is just season 1 cut in half. It wasn't supposed to be watched that way. And Netflix splitting season 1 into 2 parts screwed with the pacing of the story. I mean, they waited like a year to air the second part. And that caused, or at least heavily contributed, to the characters of Rand and Tamiko being very misunderstood by the fanbase. All this hatred for Rand built up for a long time, and so many fans got such crazy ideas about him, that when part 2 finally aired, a lot of fans were confused and or disappointed that Rand wasn't actually much of a threat. I've even heard some fans say that Rand makes no sense in part 2. He makes perfect sense if you're an adult and you understand what the show was actually doing. Just imagine if you were watching a cartoon and the villain reminded you of your own parent. How am I supposed to not think that's funny? The only reason I ever didn't think it was funny was because of how fans kept talking about Rand like he was a complete monster. That stirred up my daddy issues, and then I got upset. I'm not blaming the fans. I'm a grown-ass woman, and my issues are my own problem. But I'm just saying that Netflix waiting eons to air the second part, and confirm that Rand wasn't hurting Reagan intentionally, confused a lot of people. But yeah, when I watched the show alone, it was hilarious to me. I had a pretty rough childhood, clearly, but sometimes laughing at yourself can be very therapeutic. There's a reason why comedians make edgy jokes and make fun of themselves all the time. That's why Rand was so hilarious to me, because I was like, wow, Rand thinks he's a good dad, but he's an even worse dad than mine was. So to me, it was funny. And all of Reagan's trauma, that was funny to me too. It was the funniest shit I'd ever seen in my life. But Netflix ruined everything by splitting season 1 in half and confusing fans and making me get upset. Can I not just laugh at my own pain in peace, please? Am I allowed to do that? Just let me have this, you stupid assholes. Inside Job honestly never had a chance being on this streaming service. Netflix treated the show terribly from the beginning. And then they canceled it after only 1 season, before Rand could even get his redemption arc. Seriously, fuck Netflix. Stupid greedy bastards. I'll never forgive them for canceling Inside Job, not even this 4th definition, because I do resent them. They are my enemy and I don't forgive them and I never will. I think that's about all I have to say about Inside Job. Sorry if this video was kinda rambly or not very well structured, or if I sounded like a crazy person at the end. I just wanted to get out my remaining thoughts on the show viewing season 1 as a whole. I will now move on to making videos about other things. I don't know what my next video will be about, but I'm thinking it's gonna be something more lighthearted than this. Thanks for watching, I appreciate you guys. Bye for now.
What up, players? Guess who brought bagels?
Oh, poppy seed.